disaster recovery team after the Blue Cut fire in 2016. And we met with homeowners who lost everything. And there was a log cabin. Well, I can only guess there was a log cabin because what stood was just twisted metal from the tin roof of their house. The homeowners said that they were going to rebuild their home and the high desert community that they fell in love with on the hilltop that they overlooked the valley. And they said there was nothing they was going to do to keep them from living their dream. This family was devastated and sad about their loss. However, they were resilient and they're ready to rebuild their lives and their home. If you pay attention to the news, you'll notice that we've seen terrifying impacts of natural disasters, such as Hurricane Katrina, the Fukushima tsunami, Superstorm Sandy, and Hurricane Maria. There are examples there. And we hear stories like the one I just shared about your families and towns that have lost everything. You may have seen the devastation of the tornadoes that ripped through Moore, Oklahoma, and also Joplin, Missouri. Moreover, you may ask yourself, how do they rebuild? I want to share a story with you about a small town, not a small story, on Mississippi. And they rebuilt. And not only did they rebuild, they became resilient. In the summer of 1993, the Mississippi flooded Velmar, Illinois, not once, but twice, bringing 20 feet of water into the town. It drowned their homes and their businesses and the town's entire way of life. When the waters receded, the people of Velmar signed on for a bold experiment to move their entire town 2 miles to the east and 100 feet higher in elevation. And this was an undertaking that took, like I said, 2 years, and some people just didn't really want to do it. But however, this is what we call a disaster resilient community. So what does disaster resilience mean? The definition that we take a look at comes from ecology. And we talk about ecosystems, right? And the ecosystem, what we can refer to as what? A community. And the concept here is that these communities, right, will also have to absorb the issues that come to them, and they can thrive and survive. Okay? And this is what they do also, is they maintain themselves from ecology. And what we call that is keeping community identity. So how do you rebuild and continue to keep your community identity? That's what disaster resilience really is. In the field of emergency management and disaster management, we say that resiliency is the process of adapting well to threats and other significant sources of stress. Resiliency is the ability to bounce back, and that's what the community of Velmar, Illinois did. In the news, we hear about amazing and heroic rescues that happened during these disasters. But we don't hear about the just as amazing and heroic efforts to rebuild the communities, the people picking up the pieces of their town and becoming whole again. This recovery doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, it takes planning, it takes coordination. Moreover, it takes people that are resilient. In my career as an emergency manager, and you can see the photos up here, I've taken time to focus on helping people and individuals to become ready and prepared for disasters. And just as much as we do with individuals, we can do this with the community as a whole. So what do? We teach them how to be prepared. And so we use organizations like the Neighbor for Neighbor group that's up here. And with Neighbor for Neighbor, it's kind of like your neighborhood watch, but with a disaster twist to it. And we also have CERT programs, Community Emergency Response Team, which, like I said, is commonly known as CERT. And CERT, realistically, is what we do is we train people to help augment responders, to do things that responders might have to do, such as logistics and things like this, but we could take the civilian population, have them take that role, and allow firefighters and police officers to be on the front line. CERT programs are really what we could use as the building block to create the resilient community. So when you decide to undertake a resilient community, understand that this is a long-term process. This just doesn't happen overnight. It's going to be here, and there are things that you're going to have to do. A resilient community is something that can respond to a crisis and in ways that strengthen the bonds and resources and the community's capacity to cope. A community that is resilient is the individual and the collective capacity to respond to adversity and change. Community resilience is related to the magnitude of the shock the system can handle and remain competent. The degree to which the system is capable of self-organization and the degree to where the system can build capacity. What are we planning for here? We're planning for risk and vulnerability. But what is risks? All risks are local risks. And risks are different for different people. So what impacts me may not affect you. And I will never know the challenges that you are going to be able to undertake and understand. The risk must be assessed in the context of general social and economic circumstances. A community must come together and develop strategies for specific risks that face their communities. When your community decides what wants to be ready, like I said, it's going to take time. One of the things that I really stress specifically when we talk about developing communities is what is friendship, right? And friendship actually becomes really important here because without friends, how can you do things, right? And so we talk about friendship in the context of friending people, right, on Facebook. So friends, they have friends that are hundreds and sometimes thousands of miles away. But that's not what friendship is. This process here is through the extension of natural caring relationships. And like any relationship, it must be nurtured and cared for. And this starts with the strength of natural connections in your neighborhoods. And that's what friendship really is. Right here, we talk about this one lady who I know, really wise lady. Her name's Anna Cave. And she says, hey, lean on your critter clubs. You know, the Lions clubs, the Elks clubs, the Water Buffalo Lodge, right? And because you need to make a friend, because someday you might have to borrow a ladder. One of the things you have to understand too in your community is focus on your strengths, not your weaknesses. Strengths come from the affirmative ability of community organizations to self-organize. For a community to be resilient, its members must put into practice and early and effective actions. If residents, agencies, organizations take meaningful, intentional actions before an event, communities can be reestablished. The elements of a strong community are connectedness, commitment, shared values, and connectedness comes from participation. And when we're talking about participation, it's participating in organizations like we have up here. Y'all want to be a water buffalo? You know, well, there's a thing that happened a long time ago, and I would say back in the 70s, and Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And Bowling Alone talks about how people no longer join organizations. And I think at the core of it, this is where we started having a breakdown in community. You can't point your finger at the other guy. You need to have supportive, and you need to have critical reflection on what works and what needs to happen to change. And you also have to understand what resources that you need to support that change if needed. In the end, leaders need to communicate and have an open and honest dialogue with members of the community. People are more likely to feel part of the community when there is a shared history, shared customs, beliefs, and values. A community needs strong trust in their leaders, and understanding emergency process, and listening to the instructions that are provided in a crisis. We need to ensure, and we need to continue to build bridges, right, to decrease the conflict amongst groups in our communities. And crises tend to bring out some more conflict. How do we do this? We do this by increasing participation in the process. People will be involved when they believe that they are the community leaders of value and their ideas and contributions. And just like in this picture here, you can't have an orchestra playing if you have people doing things on their own. They have to come together to make sound be beautiful. They see the benefit involving themselves and their families in the community when people believe in them. And after disaster, like I say, conflict can and will arise. And this could be mitigated by clear organizational structure. After disaster, new roles may emerge. And if you anticipate these changes in the roles and incorporate them into your practicing, into your drills to the community leaders, we can have resilience. When you know who is doing what after disaster strikes, conflict is diminished, right? We must provide information to the public about the structure, right, and about the responsibilities of the different sectors of the community. And we must provide them with training and assistance to help. And not only just during the large-scale disasters, but it's also individuals and families prepare for emergencies, even if it's something personal such as job loss, right, or the loss of own homes to a fire. It really does take a community to assist our neighbors. This is some community groups that are up here that we talk about, such as the Rotary Club, the American Red Cross, and one of my favorite organizations, it's a veteran organization called Team Rubicon, that help victims of disasters, small and large, on a daily basis. We must share our resources in a time of crisis. And we use our community partners like our faith-based organizations and to distribute goods and services throughout the neighborhoods. And also understand what resources we need and what are available. And there's non-government organizations that can come and help you establish what this is. And a good one that I like to use is Good 360. We need to communicate our plans early. And we need to communicate them often. And we need to solicit the input of all sectors of our community, which including schools, churches, public organizations, and residents. We need to have two-way communication, right? We're allowing residents to also get feedback and also to understand that their community leaders are listening to them, right? We need to have leaders that will explore the best options and not just take what they think is right and force it down from the top up. We need to have strong policy of development and implementation for resiliency. And that leads to public awareness and community participation. Community participation leads to less conflict, and it leads to less vulnerability, and it enhances our community's ability to be resistant to disasters. The town of Elmore, Illinois had a hard decision to make. They chose to move. Some families were living there for generations, and they didn't want to go. But they made the right decision. Because at the end, moving 2 miles east and a few hundred feet up was going to save lives and property from being destroyed by the Mississippi River again. So thank you so much for your time today, and stay resilient.